evening. That was lame. Good evening. That was so good. You did it. I knew you could do it. My name is Cleve Corner. I'm the manager of author and speaker engagement here at the Pratt. Thank you so much for coming out. I really appreciate it. Lydia and Betsy are going to speak for 45 minutes, and then we'll have 15 minutes for your questions. If you have a question, just raise your hand. I'll come back up to the lectern. I'll call on you, and then use your loudest inside voice so that we can hear your question. This program is hybrid, which is like 90% of our other programs. If you don't know that already, you do now. If you can't make it out to a program, you could watch our live stream on our YouTube or Facebook page, where other people are watching right now. We also archive them there as well. So if there's somebody coming through town that you missed, you can check out our YouTube or Facebook page and see if we got them. And if we didn't, you can email me and tell me why I messed up. This evening, I'm happy to welcome Lydia Millet back to the Pratt Library to discuss her new book of stories, Atavists. The word atavism, coined by a botanist and popularized by a criminologist, refers to the resurfacing of a primitive evolutionary trait or urge in a modern being, like when a baby's born with gills. This inventive collection from Lydia Millet offers overlapping tales of urges ranging from rage to jealousy to yearning, a fluent triumph of storytelling rich in ideas and emotions, both petty and grand. This evening, Lydia will be joined in conversation by fellow writer Betsy Boyd. Lydia Millet is the author of A Children's Bible, a finalist for the National Book Award, and a New York Times Top 10 Book of the Year. Her first work of short fiction, Love and Infant Monkeys, was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in 2010. Her second, Fight No More, won an American Academy of Arts and Sciences Short Fiction Award. Atavists is her third work of short fiction. Betsy Boyd is a fiction writer, journalist, and essayist. She directs the Creative Writing and Publishing Arts MFA program at the University of Baltimore and is a recipient of numerous awards, including the Maryland State Arts Council Award, an Elliott Coleman Writing Fellowship, and a James A. Michener Fellowship. She also has had residencies, including the Alfred and Trafford Klotz International Program for Artists and the Kimmel Harding Nelson Center for the Arts. Betsy's fiction has been published in Kenyon Review, Story Quarterly, Shenandoah, American Short Fiction, Hunger Mountain, and elsewhere. Her short story, Scarecrow, received a Pushcart Prize. Harper's Bazaar editor Chelsea Sanchez wrote, "In this interconnected collection of short stories, Pulitzer Prize finalist Lydia Millet offers various slice-of-life vignettes that capture the alienation of modern life for families, couples, and communities. The characters that populate these stories feel utterly familiar, and the worlds they inhabit also reflect the chaos of our own, from reflections on post-pandemic life to the digital age." Author Marion Winnick is here this evening. Called Atavists a deliciously digestible and of-the-moment read. And in Kirkus Review's starred review, they called the story collection sharply observed, beautifully rendered, and heartbreaking. It's my great pleasure to welcome Lydia Millet and Betsy Boyd to the Pratt Library.
Lydia Millet, I love your work so much, and as I was telling you in the green room, I think they'll grab it. It's okay. I think it's cool.
Beyond me somehow.
Here, let's see.
You're so smart.
I'm good with microphones.
Yeah, you are.
I really loved your novel, My Happy Life, so much that I recommend it to students in my MFA program, to friends, to people who write, to people who are just people going through hard things very frequently. And thank you for writing that book.
Thank you for reading it. That's a book of mine that I wrote a long time ago when I was just about 30, actually, and has never been widely read like a children's Bible or something. But it's close to my heart, and it's always the one that I mention when people ask me, "What's a book of yours that no one's ever heard of that I should read?" It's always that one, because I just it kind of changed. It changed me to write that book, actually, which I think sounds pretentious and normally wouldn't say, but it's just true. Like it made me. It was a book about empathy and about just what if you were such a generous person?
Well,
What if you
let
were
me
infinitely generous?
sum it
you
up
know?
unless you
Yeah,
want to,
sure.
because this woman is living in a mental hospital that's being torn down, and she's been forgotten. And as she's starving, really, over the course of the book, she's remembering these people who helped her and people who abused her and people who did both. And her viewpoint, her perspective is so nuanced and generous. It just melts me, in a way that like going to church never did. It makes me believe in the mystery of humanity and the goodness in humanity. No cheese. But I think I wanted to touch on the power of that book because so much of your writing is sort of doggedly, I think, skewering our culture and looking at like what is challenging, what's chaotic, what is dying out in our culture. But I do, when I read your other work, see that touch of great humanity. And so I think hopefully in this 45 minutes that we've got, we can talk about that to a degree. But how did it change you? How did writing My Happy Life alter your process a little bit?
I mean, I won't go on about it at great length, but just essentially, like in my 20s, I think, like a lot of people when they're young, defining myself by what I didn't like, and sort of like it was, so this project of snarkiness is sort of what it, in retrospect, I think it was sort of like that. So what I didn't like and what I did like, but really it was like sort of defining myself by what annoyed me. And then and after sort of I wrote this book, I I had the understanding that what was more interesting to seek in the world than things that you hated was the things that you could love, like to look for things to love and creatures and people to love in the world and pieces of them to love, parts of people to love, and always to go forward. And maybe it just does sound cheesy, but after this experiment in kind of subjectivity that was this book of like, what if I inhabit this character who is just so infinitely generous that it harms her, sort of like this terrible generosity that allows this person to be used. But what does that look like, that gesture, that grace of this person? And somehow just the experiment of writing this, it just kind of changed my own affect as a, in my personal posture toward the world. I always, from then on, was, and that doesn't mean I'm not just terribly judgmental and still mean still, right? Like I can still be those things, but my essential position changed and into one that went looking everywhere for beautiful things and things to be fond of rather than things to criticize.
It just occurred to me that that novel does the work that I think Gimple the Fool is said to do. That story. I do love that story, but it doesn't move me in the same way. It doesn't sort of convince me. It feels like this historic document, this translated document that I can't really live. But anyway, read My Happy Life because it's beautiful. And this new book, Atavists, is beautiful also. And let's talk about that because there's so much to discuss. I did put some thought into not giving spoilers away, right? Because we want people to enjoy the stories as they unfold, and they are interconnected stories. Not dissimilar to, I'm going to surprise you, but Olive Kittredge, which is a very different tone. But you do meet, who's read Olive Kittredge in here? You do meet many of the same people. The people in this Los Angeles community know one another, and two of the families know one another especially well. And it's very satisfying. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about, how that interconnectedness came to be. Did you imagine it as a novel at first?
I did not, but the thing about writing short stories is that for me they're just they are a form of play, and I have a different kind of relationship to them than I do to longer form things, and so they're kind of a break for me. They're like I don't know, they're just play, and and as a result they have certain strengths and weaknesses, I think, and a weakness is that they're kind of more of the moment, and so they age more quickly, because all my short stories are more sort of referential, they're more name brands, they're more just things that aren't evergreen in my short stories. And so like I look back at a collection called Fight No More, for example, that was the one before this one, and I already think, oh my god, that's the shelf life of that has like expired, of that
But do
particular
you think
thing.
that's really,
Sorry to be a negative
I mean,
Nelly.
think about Little Women. There were so many references in
Yeah,
Little
that's
Women
true.
that we don't exactly get, but we're
Right.
like, that,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
embroidery sounds cool. Like
Right.
we just take the clues from the context and we make it our own. So
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not sure I agree. But why do the
Right.
stories have, or why
They're
are they
not
more
necess-
referential? Is it because
Yeah, right.
you're venting?
Yeah, why are they more referential? I think that because they're playful, they sort of like exist on this sort of glittery surface of like play and performance of the culture that my novels sometimes are more trying to be a couple fathoms down, and so like where the water is stiller, I guess would be
Yeah.
like a random metaphor that I select to represent that. But and so because they're play, I don't want to I don't want to like abandon these made up people that we call characters or whatever after just
Right.
one story. I'm
Right.
just interested in like checking back in with them, and also it seems to me, why not do that? If you have like a group, you have a series of units, why not make the units have relationship to each other, that is not only thematic, but like also just touchstones of people, right? And then you can see what happened to this guy later and what happened,
Yeah,
and
like
it's just fun.
Calvina said, echo, you hear the echoes like in a nursery rhyme. And I think it's true just in connected stories or novels, getting to see the same people do things is just so satisfying, like the sound of a heartbeat. Um, I, I wonder if you would read a little section for me. You can say no, but um, there's so much that's funny in these pages. And this this story is very, I think, different from the others, but the music of the comedy is so like electric, and I love comedy and fiction. And I think that what you've done here is like a really perfect balance between sort of a poetry and a stand-up style. There's a lot of dialogue, and the music is like boom, 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 boom. So again, I'll give you other choices if
No,
you
it's
if
fine.
you
Whatever
will.
it might
Just
be,
let's see. Hold on a moment.
I will do it. As long as it's not too long. I hate reading for too long in front of people because you could get bored and
So I
fall
think
asleep.
if you want to grab that copy, you
Oh,
could
yeah,
read
okay, sure.
the pastoralist beginning, which is 115 in my copy, my advanced reader.
Right, which is a typo, right? Because they spelled it pastoralist
They
instead
did.
of pastoralist.
I was
I was
wondering, yeah,
could not
if
believe it. I was like, but luckily we did correct it before.
okay, I just thought maybe that was, a neologism.
No, like I invented a cool word. No. So you said 115?
It's on 115 in my copy. Again, it's the rhythm. Go ahead.
Some people really will hate this story, but let's see. How much of it did you want me to read? Just like that page, that couple of pages. What do you
Could
think?
you read from the beginning to flash, then faint?
Okay. Damsels in distress was how he described them to the beer boys. To himself he said sheep. He was a shepherd, gathering in the strays. A sheep was fleecy and warm, often plump. Plump was ideal in sheep, up to a point, of course. Pleasantly plump, not morbidly obese. A fatted sheep was properly humble, whereas a slender sheep had attitude. What a fatted sheep needed was a fleecing, to give up the weight of all that wool, and what he offered was to take it. They posted flattering pictures, selfies taken with the chin jutting out so you couldn't see the flabby neck beneath, or from above like on a pillow so the flesh fell back from the bones. But he was an expert. He could read the angles. Once he secured a meetup, he did his flash routine. his personal Patrick Bateman, grooming, lifting, getting pumped, taking his pills and supplements, so when he presented to the sheep, he was psyched. He couldn't come on too strong, though. A sheep was wary when she was separated from the flock, afraid of wolves, a natural impulse. He had to roll over, showing he was more like a pet than a predator, expose a tender underbelly. That was one of the best parts of the 4 Fs. The flash routine, when he made himself look and feel his best, was followed by the feint routine. Flash, that's feint with an E, if anyone was, wondering. Flash, then feint.
Thank you. Sometimes we're in very close third and then very close third with someone else within the same story. And I think let's stay here for a moment though, but this character is so awful. But there's so much humor. And I think that one thing that is helpfully redeeming for me about the occasional awful character in the book is that when you get to the end of a story, again, no spoilers, but we don't ever, that I can recall, end on a big flip from a cliffhanger. It's usually a soft, literary, mindful moment. And then later we return to characters who were in the story with the troubling person. Like the woman that this man has recently broken up with gets her own story toward the end of the book. And in that story, again, no spoilers, what I thought might become a revenge odyssey is really a look inward. And that's amazingly satisfying and surprising. And so I don't know if it's because you've been writing so well, so long, that your instincts do that, or did you think, I can't end loudly with any piece because I want to get to the next connecting story, Can you discuss that a little bit?
Well, I think it's really easy with short stories to make a mistake of like closing a loop. I don't know how many of you are writers in here, but like it really is.
Well, in a workshop, that's what I think, especially a beginning workshop, we're sort of looking for that loop to be closed.
And it's horrible. It's very trite.
Yeah.
It's very trite and like hackneyed to sort of just come and make some sort of full circuit in a
But
short
don't
story.
you think you have to learn how to do that in the early days?
Learn how to not like
how to
do
know,
this,
how to make
how to
circuit.
actually do it so that you cannot do it?
Yeah.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I know that I did when I was in my favorite writing workshops were all as an undergraduate, and then I was only briefly in them as a grad student for like one semester before I, dropped out of school. But as an undergrad, I had great workshops, and I wrote terrible, terrible, terrible stories. That like one was, and yeah, maybe I was doing that, and maybe you need to do, because you always do the mimicry of things, right? Before you can learn to twist that into new shapes and stuff. Yeah, and I remember I wrote one story about like a post-apocalyptic landscape, indeed presaging some of my, future obsessions, but where it was just, I think, a mother and daughter surviving and like hunting giant cockroaches with spears. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that story made like a whole, like I'm pretty sure it had like a surprise ending,
I feel like if you've got that kind of content, you could maybe get away with closing the loop, I don't know.
Right.
Like we want to see, it's like brandishing the gun. You kind of want to see the roach die. I don't know. But so give me one more little excerpt because, hold on, let me find it. I think my favorite story might be Artist, in which Helen is spending time with both her daughters, Mia and, remind me of the other daughter's name, do you remember? Shelley. There were a couple of name flips in the arc. So, but it's her relationship with them is so sweet and hilarious. So I think if you could read some of the dialogue. So Helen lost her husband in her 30s. He fell while climbing or hiking, correct? And now I feel like she's very close with these daughters, but their banter it teaches you how to understand this family. Like at first I was like, am I supposed to really like these characters? And then I thought, I love these characters. They like each other. Okay, so if you could read from 50 where if Michael had lived and the girls had two parents, maybe, you're right, it's Shelley, it would have gone better. And then you could stop wherever you want. But if you could try to go to what we need isn't more life hacks, like to the end of that dialogue. It's like a page.
Okay. Yeah, if Michael had lived and the girls had two parents, maybe it would have gone better. Shelley, who's become like an agent's assistant in Hollywood and is very like goal-oriented, Shelley could still use her talents for good. She was only 23, but would she? Doubtful. She liked the game of selling and getting paid to play it. In sales, you had to understand desire, not only how to satisfy it, but how to create it in the first place. That was how she rhapsodized about her career path, sitting at the kitchen island and doodling on an iPad with her finger as Helen made them cocktails, one of her Friday night visits. You're catering to the id, Helen had said. What if major talent agencies like yours tried to transform the collective? Wouldn't that be more of a challenge? Wouldn't it be less like shooting fish in a barrel? The collective doesn't have an agent, Mom. But instead of trying to place actors in movies and shows that promote the status quo, the same as a zillion that have come before, you could try to place them in projects with a progressive agenda. You know what that would be? A failure. Your theory of change is like basically non-existent. You should watch Manufacturing Consent, or even read it. Of course I've seen it. Communications 101, I was a freshman. Well, you didn't take it to heart, obviously. Mom, Noam Chomsky's a dinosaur, and not even a ferocious T-Rex either. More of a brontosaurus, a lumbering plant eater. She drew a picture, a vaguely Chomsky-like head with glasses on a long neck, then 4 squat legs, and a tiny tail like a giraffe's. You really don't know your brontosauruses. Here's what I do know, Mom. Those screenplays with what you call a progressive agenda, they're mostly super bad, earnest and lame, unless you can attach a star who's into like liberal vanity projects. But the market can only take so many ruffalos. What's a ruffalo? Is it like a buffalo? Shelley snickered, kind of. What we need isn't more hacks. We need a Leni Riefenstahl of the left. A Nazi propagandist, that's what you want me to be? A brilliant propagandist, but in the service of the people. I don't know when to stop
That's
reading.
good. That's fine. That's great. I just love it. And yes. Do you see what I mean about it's this stand-up rhythm? I mean, it's just, there's so much. It's like if the Gilmore Girls had been written by Bergman or Lydia Millet. Or the Lydia Millet, sure, exactly. Yeah, interesting. So I wonder, again, when I teach writing and when I hear authors talk, the word compassion comes up frequently. And back when I was in grad school, one of my teachers was very obsessed with compassion. She wanted everyone to be compassionate to their characters. And I remember many of the male students resisted that. And I kind of thought, oh, she's just old. But now that I'm old, I think she's exactly right. And when I can become compassionate with anybody I'm writing about, then the story works a little bit better. And how did you achieve, the nuance and the humanity in these stories that are a little bit satirical? And, we talked about the New York Times review. The woman said you were very cynical. I don't think that she read deeply enough. But, how do you achieve that balance? Is it something you're conscious of? trying to make these into real people?
I mean, I think that these stories or most anything that I write or enjoy reading or whatever sort of has this balance of humor and empathy, right? And it's a balance because whenever you have humor, you have to objectify and you have to reduce, right? Like that's how we make things funny. It's by objectifying other people cruelly, right? Like that's, and it's a very rare sort of comedian who can pull off genuine, not, you know, not pablum kind of humor without doing that. It does exist. I've seen it, but it's quite rare,
right.
you know. And
it can be boring.
Right. And so I think that you're right. No, and just not funny, right? Like for me, there has to be there has to be an edge and some cruelty and some objectification for something to make me laugh. Because I have to be surprised, right? Like we're surprised. We need to be surprised for humor. And usually that's the form of that surprise it emerges most easily from like reducing and insulting another living being. I mean that's so
Right.
but at the same time the only thing that makes, well, I mean most art, but certainly like writing and fiction and stuff, the only thing that makes it like porous and interesting is the space that it gives us to exist in its own sensibility, like the breathability of the air kind of between the letters and the words and the sentences, right? And in that space always has to be like imagination and empathy, because it is like you existing in this abstract community with other minds and other feelings, other you know, other subjectivities, other selves, whether they are real or made up. And they're always even if they're made up, they are of course like reverberations of real people, always, who could and have and will exist, right? And so the thing is always to have both, I think, to always have this, to always have kind of empathy or compassion, you could call it. Maybe there's a distinction, but there's a Venn diagram, right?
Well, empathy sounds smarter.
Oh,
You know what I mean? But
yeah.
I don't know. I feel like they're similar.
Well, yeah, yeah, but maybe compassion to me sometimes sounds a little more like sympathy than empathy.
Yeah.
But anyway, but like
you could go to pity. You don't want to go there.
Right. They're on a continuum, sort of. But like this, you know, ability to shift into the position of others and feel for them and whatever. That always should kind of, I think, underlie all the words and all the spaces. But then on top of that, you can layer, you know, cruel moments that make us laugh. And I do that in my writing to make actually myself laugh while I'm doing it. That's the sole reason I do. You know, I'm not contemplating an audience if I write something that objectifies someone or whatever. I'm just amusing myself. And when I write something that is not funny, that has other intentions, that too, you know, I'm doing for myself, like to make myself cry or whatever it might be. Yeah.
When we were sort of growing up, you know, the men wrote the talk show jokes, and it was mostly men writing Saturday Night Live. And then I was an intern on Conan O'Brien the first season in '94, and there was one woman on the writing staff and then like 9 men. And I bring that up because I wonder, did you know that you were funny, you know, your whole life? Have you gotten funnier? Because I didn't realize until reading this book how hilarious you are. Like, how do you own that as a lady?
That's I guess I've always thought, well, I don't know what the answer is to that. I mean, I just
maybe you
I
don't
guess
have
I
the
don't
same
primarily
hang-ups.
identify as funny. I identify as funny along the way. But if I were to set out, to be funny is a terrible task, right? It's incredibly
Because
difficult.
My Happy Life isn't particularly funny, right? I mean,
right.
it's sometimes because she's unaware of.
Yeah,
the
mostly.
level of,
So
of depth that
right.
she's
I
conveying.
used to do a thing where I would write books that were intended to be funny, and then I think I actually talked about this last time I was here in Baltimore at this awesome library that is just such a treasure. I love it so much, you guys. By the way, all libraries, but this is a very fine one. But like last time I was here, I talked about the fact that I used to write books that really were like intended chiefly as sort of satirical or sort of lampoon books and very caricature based. And then I would write books that were more sort of contemplative and like about ideas and abstractions sort of, and never the twain should meet. And then at a certain point around a children's Bible was when I first really tried to marry those two things. And like, can you write about serious matters and also have humor that doesn't stick out? Like the humor seems organic, even though you're writing about like the end of the world. Like, can you pull that off? And so since then, I've tried to write books in which both were present, that weren't, you know, chiefly only sad books, say, or like thoughtful books, you know. But so I've tried to kind of hybridize that tendency of my own to
It
like.
sounds like giving yourself permission. Like, I think, you know, we hear the advice from other writers, just, you know, you don't know what's going to sell, just do whatever, do whatever. And you know, I think you've blended the funny and the deeply poetic really splendidly in this book. I wanted to mention Mia, who's my favorite character. Mia is Helen's daughter, and she's looking for a path, really. She wants to find her bliss and doesn't necessarily want to make money doing it, to Helen's chagrin. And she discovers that she really enjoys working with old people. It's so beautiful because this is a girl who cuts up a onesie. This is Mia, right? Who cuts the onesie up and wears it? Yeah, and she wears it to a nursing home at one point.
That was actually based on my own daughter, like thrifting these onesies and like making them into like a little cutoff
right,
tops.
right.
Yeah.
And she loves to be, you know, pretty and serve food and sort of be looked at. And so when we first meet her, she seems like this typical young woman who's trying to own her sexuality and doesn't necessarily have that much going on intellectually, but she really is, for me, kind of the rock of the book. How did you get to know Mia? And is there someone like her in your life? And also, who's your favorite character of all these folks?
Oh, I don't know that second
And
answer.
are you Helen?
I guess I could be sort of a Helen, except I did not suffer a particular loss of that kind, of a husband tumbling off a cliff. But yeah, Mia was, you know, Mia is sort of partly based on my daughter, but like doesn't resemble her on the face of things. My daughter's named Nola. Mia, but I do remember there's like a line in there where Mia she makes a bargain with her mom that she can spend her gap year at home if she does like X number of hours of community service, right? Sort of to make up for not really having a job and not going to college that year and whatever. And she's like trying to think of things to do. And she just like wants to think, is there like what's the volunteer work I can do where I get to like wear like a cool outfit that's really cute and give out like teddy bears or like fresh baked cookies or whatever. Like she really is hoping that's some work that she could do, you know. And I do remember like my daughter trying to find like summer jobs for a few years in high school where she was like, you know, like what could I do that's really appealing, also easy, and just sort of looks really good on me.
Right,
You know?
right.
And
Well,
she's
I mean,
actually
yeah.
a very serious person now, like at college and stuff like that. But I do remember because she was always perfectly composed. She was very stylish, unlike her mother. She always just like looked put together, but she also, just, you know, there was this notion that maybe she could do some work that was befitting, you know, her station and her style.
Well, maybe
Anyway.
it's the Instagram effect, right? Which is like, that's how we start the whole book, with that wonderful story. But
And actually, my daughter's not interested in Instagram and hates selfies and all
Yeah.
that kind of thing. But it's very easy to just like gather that from like an amalgam of all her friends who do enjoy like infinite selfies, right? The infinite selfie thing. the infinite sexy baby selfie. Yeah.
Yes, yes. What about a favorite character? Is that fair? Do you have you know, if you could have dinner with one of these characters, who would it be?
Certainly not the pastoralist.
Right.
Um, hmm. You know, I kind of have some amount of tenderness for most of them, but they're probably too, a lot of them are too like me for me to wish to have dinner with.
Not Buzz.
Buzz means well. Buzz
He
means
does.
well.
He does. Of course he
Yeah,
does.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, I think he's on the right path with the
Right,
tiny house.
he's got a tiny house in the backyard that he's hoping
learning to cook
will host
new
refugees.
food,
Yeah,
so
because
he
he
won't be
can't
so
run
fat.
anymore. He used to run marathons. Now he's got bad joints. A
and he's gotten a little chubby.
little bit chubby, some fast food. Yeah.
He's
It's
so
tough.
American.
You know, I think the person that I sort of wrote most from really is the sort of Trudy, probably,
Okay.
who opens like that. She seems most like me in probably disgraceful ways. You know, like it's probably not a good thing I'm saying about myself, but and she's more intellectual than I am. I'm not really an intellectual, and she's like an academic, you know, and I'm not like that. But
That's such a beautiful opening. I mean, beautiful is an odd word. It's just I can't not read this book. Could you just read maybe the first page?
okay, I will
Just
read
and
it.
then I
If
won't
you
ask
guys
for
will-
any more reading.
Okay, if you won't
I
get too
promise.
like impatient. Okay, all right.
She didn't want to overread. That's why. I know.
What?
Marian's saying more
Oh,
reading,
okay,
more
yeah.
reading.
I just don't like the people who read for like 29
right.
minutes.
Well, you're
and
no,
like,
no.
oh my
We're not.
God.
You're not going to do that.
Okay.
You're not doing
Okay. So this is the first story. It's called the first page of the first story. It's called Tourist, and that's what you wanted me to read.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Okay. She was courting her own disgust these days. The way she'd picked at her knee scabs as a kid, knowing it would end in blood, but doing it anyway. Revulsion was a stimulant. The surest route to that stimulation was the feed of a guy who'd once been a friend. Not a close friend, but one she'd respected back then. In recent years, he seemed out of reach to the likes of her, neither rich nor well connected. As so many of his other contacts on social media appeared to be. He was a busy man, a consultant on public art projects. The work was rewarding, of course. But the real path to redemption for him lay in fatherhood. His tiny daughter was a paragon. He'd relate his dialogues with her in the comments on his Instagram, conversations that showcased her innocence and powers of perception, along with the wisdom of his sensitive answers. One dialogue concerned an incident some centuries before, when a famous man of science had been burned at the stake. Yes, father and daughter had discussed this dreadful event. They had to, because the tiny daughter was always engaged in the learning process, be it pre-calculus far beyond her years, the careful study of wildflowers plucked from their own tangled and picturesque garden, or in this case, the history of the Inquisition. To comfort her, her father said the person had, by means of his immolation, quote, dispersed his atoms back into the universe he loved. The phrase allowed him to illustrate key attributes of himself. First, that he, like the scientist, knew some physics. For was it not physics that allowed us all to understand how the particles that make up being flow across time in seeming infinitude through the bodies of the living and celestial alike? Do we not breathe in the very same particles that traveled through the lungs of Julius Caesar as he died? Second, it showed he could transmute a tale of violent execution into romantic poetry. For the scientist had perished on a noble altar, the pursuit of knowledge. And third, it showed how he wished to manifest for his tiny, adorable daughter, and in passing his several thousand followers, the fineness of his sentiments. How flawed we are, he acknowledged in another comment. We cast our sins even beyond the planet now, into low Earth orbit, for example, where lethal space junk floated in a massive debris field, the outermost garbage dump of a civilization imploding. And none too slowly either. But one thing he could do was uphold the sacred trust of raising a child, teaching her that even upon this sadly devastated sphere, The two of them could bear witness to the wonders that remained. To attest to that wonder, he posted portraits of the tiny daughter with gentle beams of light falling across her doe-like face. She could be seen in soft focus with a book open across her lap, solemn in her attention, solving math puzzles on a table in the living room beneath a soaring vaulted ceiling, walking in the dappled shade of a suburban bower, a sprig of frail blossom tucked behind one ear, or tenderly cradling a beloved doll. There is more, but I will stop.
That's so good. It's just so nice to be able to see ourselves in the character who starts the book, because haven't we all been there? But we haven't maybe articulated what we're doing. And we've also posted that shit. So it's just incredibly rewarding. Did you begin this collection in writing that story by any chance? Do you remember sort of how, the whole world burst into being?
Actually, I will confess to you that I began with a story that I had to remove finally,
Oh,
lest it offend
okay.
people that I know. But this too was based on someone that I have known, although I changed salient details, I hope. But I am sort of amazed by the way in which people can be. I've always just been fascinated by people's blind spots, right? And we have these new platforms for casting our own image across the world, um, and here we put our blind spots on such fabulous display, where we believe we are praising, for example, our child or our wife. And, there's even a name for this, right? Like, he's a wife guy, the guy who posts on Instagram, he's a wife guy. But, we really genuinely believe that we are praising others, and yet so nakedly praise ourselves, right? By reflection. And
I will say I follow you on Instagram, Lydia, and you don't do that. You really
you.
may be
But I
this,
barely post.
you may be this character who's kicking off the collection.
Yeah, I could be more like Trudy, because she's sort of like, just nitpicking and judgmental. Some aspect of myself is Trudy, yeah.
What was the editing process like in just the last couple of minutes that we have? Because I wonder, as a fiction writer myself, how you keep this engine going. Yes, you win prizes and you've got your following, you're very good, but we know that book sales are key. And like, what is it like when you submit a book? Do you know it's going to get published? Do you, what level of power do you exist on?
Wow, that's an awesomely personal question. I love it. No, I was just saying it's something the other day that was not about this book, that how like someone asked, like, what is the question you wish people would ask you at the end of that they never do. And I was like, I don't have a question, but I wish for a personal question to be asked, because those are the kind of interesting ones to which you don't have a pat response. I like questions that cause like confusion in someone like me.
Well, I know so many, all my friends are writers, and I
Yeah.
know that, many of them after the third book, or the second book, it's really almost impossible. And so, you're heroic, and anything you have to say would be interesting.
Well, I think it's just you sort of luck into a good, I hate to say it like it, but there's a luck thing where you just find people you really like at some entity that is a publishing entity. And I love my editor, and I love the publicist who works on my book, my editor Tom Mayer at Norton. And it's just it's a good company, and they're the only big publisher that's employee owned in the US, for example. And so they really are collaborative with each other, and cool like that. The only big publisher, mind you, of course there are smaller ones. But yeah, so really is just, I think it just comes down to people that you have relationships with who decide to trust you and decide to publish you, even though not all your books make money. Some of your books make money and some others don't, right? And it can be really hard actually to predict, because there's a randomness, an arbitrary, capricious quality to the market. And some things that are good don't get read, and some things that are not as good do get read. That's just how it is, right? So it really is just like, I think, just faith and trust and personal ties.
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah, integrity. You've got chemistry there. Okay, well, that's nice to hear. I loved talking to you. I think we're going to turn it over to some questions, maybe.
Yeah, we have 15 minutes for your questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand now, and I'll call on you. Great, in the back.
Yes, of course. The death, God. Thank you for reading that book, and thank you for mentioning that. For a second, I was like, what? Someone donated it. This is a terrible story. But thank you. I mean, thank you. I'm happy to devastate you. I'm sorry to say. I just really, I really write to make myself feel and to have someone else have felt and then say they have felt is it's awesome. Thank you. And you can please feel free to follow that up if you want to with any other comment, because I know my response has probably been inadequate.
I'm going to ask a question from the audience online. What makes you most excited about a story?
And this is for me and me, or me and Betsy?
Yeah, well, we'll throw it to Betsy and you. How about you answer first, then Betsy?
So, most excited about a story. As a writer or reader, you think they meant?
Yeah,
as a writer?
As a writer, I believe, yeah.
I mean, I guess it's like, so I live in the middle of the desert, right? And I chose to live there. I went there from Manhattan, where I lived before, because I love the desert and it's beautiful to me and it's sublime and just vast. And I live outside of town, and I have family living with me, but I'm mostly not social on any given day, really. And so for me, it's like going to a party when I write stories. It really is just like going to a party and like eavesdropping on people, except I made them up, so it's, I get to, yeah. But it's like a social act for me. Short stories more than novels, I would say, in a certain way. Like they're specifically for me, like going to a party. So I think that's my answer.
Betsy?
I was also going to say it's like going to a party. No, but I think I love to hear a voice, or, sometimes I'll be at the grocery and hear a woman utter something terrible or funny, and that kicks off a story for me. And then to have a little time to develop it and get to know that woman and then think of her as I'm jogging, it's almost like it really is like I met a new friend or a new person who's like in me, and it teaches me about myself. It helps me to slow down in a world that is so utterly chaotic. It just makes me feel like focused and a little clearer. Yeah.
There's not another question in the room. There we go. Marianne?
Want to talk about the cover?
Oh yeah, I love the cover.
Yeah, I love the cover too, and I can never take credit for covers except that I help decide what they will be, but of course I don't design them. And I like this one because I just, I love animals and the forms of animals, and I'm kind of obsessed with the forms of other animals. And I guess, now that you mention it, this looks like sort of party animals. And I just said that short stories are like going to a party for me in my life of a hermit, semi-hermit. So maybe this just is party animals. I do love the fox representation and the strange anthropomorphized bunnies. I live among bunnies and foxes where I live, and so it's apt. And we are sort of burning down the house right now, so maybe it's apt in that way too. There's so much fun and crazy about this cover to me. And I will say that when my mother first saw it, she was like, I don't understand it. And that has remained her position.
Sarah?
I saw that you have
No one has ever read those books. I mean, no, so there's one that's kind of a YA book called Pills and Starships. And a few more people, I think, have read that. And then there's a trilogy that's sort of for middle readers, like 9 to 11 or 12-year-olds. But I am deficient in, like, my scientific understanding of developmental child psychology. And so I did not write them in the way that has become somewhat, I don't know if it's dominant, but there is a thing, right, in writing for younger readers now, where you're supposed to know what their moment of sort of cognitive and emotional development and also language development is. And I had no idea. You know, I just was writing them as fun books for my kids to read over the summers, like 3 sequential summers. So that's why I will say that my children have not read them.
It's another question from the online audience. Have you ever set out to write a short story and it's led to something longer, like a novel or novella, or vice versa?
I don't think so. I once took an assignment to write a short story, and then it turned into a book of short stories. But generally, I just sort of know what the form of something is when I start making it. That is, like, I know if it's a long thing or a short thing. I don't want to sound loftier. But for me, it's a lot about just starting from nothing, and it's just like the joy of finding like a path where there was none. So not very calculated, or not a lot of forethought. But there was one assignment I got that caused me to write my first book of short stories called Love and Infant Monkeys. And it was an assignment to write from McSweeney's. And it was like an assignment to write a story based on F. Scott Fitzgerald's list of story ideas he never realized. And so it was an assignment, it just said girl and giraffe. And so I wrote a story about George Adamson, who was, do you remember that Born Free in the 70s, that book and movie and everything? So Joy Adamson and the lions. So I wrote a story about a giraffe and a lion. And then based on that, I just enjoyed it so much that I was like taking something from real life, like actual sort of nonfiction, like news stuff, biographical stuff, and then spinning something made up from that to get the story. And so I decided to do a book of stories like that, where I took like a real situation that in the first story, Madonna was on her English estate. And it was like sparked by an actual event that she had this estate and various things. But then I spun out a false Madonna from that, you know, a false Madonna escapade, you know. And so then I did a whole book like that. But generally, yeah, I do just fail at something and just put it away. But I don't usually transform it from one thing into another. I'm working on several things. I've had this habit. I think it's because, like, I don't know. As a middle-aged person, I've become more. Just not as smart, or I don't know. Like, I feel really fragmented all the time in my attention, and especially like the past few months. Like, I just feel like I'm going a bit mad all the time, and I can't really focus. And so I've started working on multiple projects like at the same time. So now I have like 3 novels that I'm writing, except I've kind of put a couple of them away since the election, actually. It didn't feel right to be working on those particular projects. And I started a new one called Spartica. Then I have 2 novels coming out next. And then I have a big, I guess, a failed novel that I just had to put away that I worked on for years, that I gave it to one friend of mine to read, and he said that it should never be seen again. So I believed him. He used to be my publisher, and I was like, oh, wow, you might be right. And so I just put it away. Anyway, so still one encounters failure quite often.
You have a question in the back.
Yeah, I usually start from the title because I like titles so much. In this case, I didn't. This was like a substitute title. And I'm, you know, because the title of this book was not a word, and the sales reps had a problem with it not being a word, which I totally understand. They're really great folks, and they work really hard, and they deserve to have a book that had a word for a title. But it was called the ists, like you know, hyphen ISTS, because each of the stories is and I just really like that suffix, and I find it really interesting. So it was called the ists before, and they were like, no can do. So I was like, okay, I'll choose a weird, pretentious, obscure word instead, but at least it's a word, right? And I like this word. It's an interesting, I think it's a really interesting word, but it's not a word that, you know, people are like, oh, right, you know. But at least it's a word. So, but yeah, no, right. It was just like it was a replacement, but I do like thinking of titles first. And the really early books I wrote, I always thought of the titles first, like George Bush, Dark Prince of Love. I was just on my couch in New York, and I was like, I want to write a book called that. So, I mean, I was like 26 or whatever at the time. But, yeah, titles are fun. They're so fun.
Did you have a question? In the back.
Wendell?
Yes, you, sir.
This young man in Tribune with this film called Dinosaurs. Where can I find this book? Is it in the collection of stories?
Dinosaurs is the novel that came out, it was like 2 books ago. So it's just a novel called Dinosaurs. And it's around. Yeah, it should be around. Yeah,
It's
I don't
definitely
know.
in the library collection, Wendell, and Ivy has it for sale out front right now as well. Yep. I think there was a question right here.
Well, I guess writers are readers, right? So, were there any interconnected short story collections that you kind of think of as touchstones creating?
Not really, because I'm not as much of a short story reader as I am a novel reader. And then recently nonfiction. I've been like an obsessively nonfiction reading the past few years. I will say that like things that I just deeply admire in short stuff. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, Lydia Davis is definitely a person whose short things I just think are fantastic. And I like you know, Mary Ruefle, like poets who do short prose also. I tend to really like that. But yeah, I'm not really an expert on short stories. I mean, they're obviously great. Like, I think Joy Williams has great short stories, historically amazing. Like, I loved 99, even like more recently, 99 Stories of God. I thought was really excellent. And she's a person I know who actually was my workshop teacher for the semester I had as an MFA student before I dropped out. And she really scared me at the time. But now she's kind of a friend. And I do really love her writing, especially the short stories and and essays. And I guess I really also just admire, yeah, there's so many essayists that I admire these days. So I'm kind of like just reading all over the place, I guess.
Please help me thank tonight's moderator, Betsy Boyd. And this evening's author, Lydia Millet.
Thank you guys for coming. Really, thank you.
So Lydia, be happy to sign your book. Again, Ivy Bookshop is outside. Not only do they have the new collection of short stories, but they have many of Lydia's backlists. So please buy some books and come back and she'll talk some more. Thanks for coming out.